How tall is the dog? I have a PhD in maths from the University of Oxford, and I can't solve this. Evan, you might want to ask for a refund. Well, this is delightful. Code Geek posts what they call a really difficult problem, and it rakes in a cool 16.2 million views. Then Evan capitalizes on this astonishingly engaging math problem with this banger tweet, which rakes in another 10 milli. Then Dr. Chris Combs from the University of Texas at San Antonio either doesn't get Evan's joke, or just otherwise wants the opportunity to have his own funny reply, and another 4 million views. All told, that's 30 million views, not counting all the other tweets the problem appeared in. Like this one, which I assume was inspired by Evan's original joke. My dad has a PhD in mathematics. I asked him if he knew how to solve this. He said, "We can't. We don't know how to do it." It's also, of course, an iteration of the 2023 "my father-in-law is a builder" meme template, which honestly cracks me up every time. Now, the real question is, how am I going to get
18 minutes and 13 seconds
out of this problem? After all, it isn't actually difficult, is it? No, but we can talk about a general solution method and a bit about what it takes to study math at the University of Oxford. But let's start with how to solve this dastardly PhD level dog problem. Please leave your big brain solutions in the comments. This 200 is the length of the pole, but with a dog taken away. Then 300 is the dog added back in, and another dog added on top. So plus 2 dogs caused an increase of 100. If the addition of 2 dogs increased the height by 100 centimeters, then certainly it must be that one dog has a height of 50 centimeters. Or if we use a real unit, 19.685 inches. Let me know how you'd solve this down in the comments. You might not think there's much room for style, but I'm sure the internet came through with multiple angles of attack. Let's see here. At Grok, Grok 67.
I got teeth behind my eyes that tear the flesh from what I
Well,
say.
to warm our frostbitten hearts, at least let it be known that Oxford PhD Evan had no issue solving this problem. He completed his joke by making the problem quite a bit more complicated than necessary, stuffing it into a complex number and using a completely ornamental contour integral. He lets the complex number z have real part post height and imaginary part dog height. Then, by multiplying z by 1 plus I, we get a number whose real and imaginary parts are exactly the pieces of information we know: the post height minus the dog height, and p plus d. He then solves that equation for z and continues down here. He multiplies and divides by the conjugate 1 minus I in order to clean up the denominator. I squared, of course, is minus 1, so the denominator ends up being 1 minus minus 1, so 2, and in the end we get this value for z. Remember, the real part of z, 250, that's the post height, and the imaginary part, of course, is the dog height, which we know to be 50 centimeters. Moody Redhead, who describes herself as a mysterious and riddly bitch, says, "It's way easier than that. I'd ask Oxford for a refund." She then shows a pretty typical solution, and Burke replies, "Nah, you can't solve that without closed integral." Now, you might think this comment would just be laughed off and everybody would get on with their doom scrolling. But not so. In fact, this back and forth escalated all the way to an Algebra 2 report card drop. Like Moody Redhead, to solve the problem, most people just used a system of equations. This fella here busted out matrices. First, he writes the equations corresponding to the 2 pictures. He uses D for dog and W for wall. Wall plus dog is 300 and wall minus dog is 200. Two linear equations at a time is called a system of linear equations, and he goes on to write this system using matrices, which, as you can tell, are just rectangular arrays of numbers. This one here is the coefficient matrix, storing the coefficients of the variables. In this system, they don't jump out at us because they're all plus or minus 1, but those are the coefficients: 1, 1, 1, -1. Hence, we get this coefficient matrix. This one-column matrix is what we might call the variable vector, storing the unknowns dog and wall. Over here is the constant vector with 300 and 200. Now, these two matrices are being multiplied, and the way that works is the rows get matched up with the columns. So this first row would get matched up with the column to produce 1w plus 1d equals 300. Then the second row would get matched up with the column to produce 1w minus 1d equals 200. So you can see how this matrix equation is indeed just this system. The point of doing any of this is that there are powerful general methods for solving systems of linear equations, and here Mr. Dovasco is using Cramer's rule, named after Gabriel Cramer, who published it in 1750. However, as we would expect by Stigler's law, a long unpublished manuscript from 1729 shows that the brilliant Colin Maclaurin had made use of Cramer's rule, and maybe even taught it to his students, more than 20 years before Cramer published it. Either way, Cramer's rule works for any number of linear equations. It will certainly work for the two we have here, and it uses something called the determinant. For two equations specifically, it says the solution is this. These might look like matrices, but in fact, the straight bars mean determinant. Mr. Dovasco used the alternative DET notation, which means the exact same thing. Each denominator is the determinant of the coefficient matrix. You can see those are the coefficients of the system. The numerators have almost the same thing, except for the first variable, its first column is replaced by the constants, and for the second variable, its second column is replaced by the constants. This might seem a bit haphazard, but indeed, it works. Computing determinants can be a headache, but at least in the case of the 2x2 matrices that we have here, it's straightforward. All we have to do is subtract the diagonal products. So the determinant of this matrix, 300 times minus 1, minus 200 times 1. That's why we see negative 300 minus 200. The determinant of this matrix, 1 times minus 1, minus 1 times 1. So minus 1, minus 1. Doing the computation, we see 250, that's the value for wall. And for dog, we do a similar thing and find its height is 50 centimeters. So that's a very cool, simple example of Cramer's rule, which, like I said, works for bigger systems of linear equations too. So with Cramer's rule, we could solve more sophisticated dog and wall problems also. Like, how about a dog-frog wall problem? Well, now that we have three unknowns, two cute pictures and their corresponding equations will not suffice. For comparison, if we consider the system from the previous problem with just two unknowns, the two relevant equations are lines, and we can graph them to find the unique solution. But with three unknowns, we leave the constricted two-dimensional plane behind and leap with drama and flair into the third dimension. Each equation represents a plane, and two non-parallel planes intersect in a line, hence infinitely many points. And so, to actually solve such a problem, we need one more picture. So here's a solvable dog-frog wall problem. We begin by writing the equations. Then we can turn those equations into matrix form. Now, with the system written as a matrix equation, Cramer's rule applies just as before. Here are the values of the three unknowns. Again, notice how the denominators have the determinants of the coefficient matrix. The numerators are similar, but the first variable has the first column replaced by the constants, then second column replaced, and third column replaced. We saw that to calculate the determinant of a 2x2 matrix, you just need to subtract the products of the diagonals. But what about a 3x3 matrix? These sorts of determinants can be calculated with this snappy formula, which isn't as bad as it looks, but it is a nuisance. In the end, using that formula, or secret tricks if you know any, we arrive at these solutions. So yes, solving a dog wall problem, or dog frog wall problem, or dog frog smoky prog wall problem should be trivial for a math PhD haver. Evan was almost certainly joking about every part of this tweet. He's only 21, so probably no PhD in math from Oxford. But just for kicks, what does it take to earn a math PhD from Oxford? Well, certainly a whole lot more than we could touch on here. But from 2007 to 2025, if you were a student in the 4th term of your A-levels, think the end of high school if you're in America, if you wanted to be admitted to Oxford's math program, you'd take the MAT, the mathematics admissions test, to demonstrate the depth of your math knowledge. It has now been replaced by the TMWA, but in October 2025, there was a final MAT test. The test consists of 25 multiple choice questions, and then some so-called long questions. The long questions that a student receives are either version X or version Y. So let's take a peek at a couple of the, let's say, version X questions before we part ways today. Parts 1, 2, and 3 are with respect to a diagram described here. Parts 4 and 5 are with respect to the diagram that's described here. And if you could solve that dog and wall problem, then maybe you could solve these too. For a bit of fun, let's try the first and last problems together to see how we might do if we were trying to begin a journey studying math at Oxford. So the first question is about the number of segments in the diagram that's described here. It says there are 8 points equally spaced around the unit circle, with each pair joined by a straight line segment, except for the cases where the 2 points lie directly opposite each other. So if this is our unit circle, and these are our 8 equally spaced points, here is in red the line segments that aren't included in the diagram, because these are the ones that connect points directly opposite each other. You can see that's a total of 4 line segments that aren't included. Then, to answer the question, how many line segments are there in the diagram? It's easy. We can use what's called a binomial coefficient to count them. In our case, we need n, the number of points, to be 8, and r, the number of things we're choosing, to be 2. This is read as 8 choose 2, and it tells us the number of ways that we can pick 2 points from our collection of 8 points. And the question says that any pair of points is going to be joined by a line segment, excluding, of course, these 4 line segments. This is essentially the total number of possible line segments, which is 28. We know from the question 4 are being excluded, so the final answer then is 28 minus 4, or 24. The last question is a bit trickier and concerns a much messier diagram. We could draw the diagram. It says that we have 3 sets of points: A, which has 3 points, B, with 4 points, and C, with 5 points. And every point in each set is joined by a line segment to every point in the other sets. That means that although this diagram looks like a giant mess, the information we actually need is rather simple, and perhaps would be better represented with this simple schematic. Here are our 3 sets with 3, 4, and 5 points, and the lines between them just represent the fact that every possible connection between the sets exists. Every point in A is connected to every point in B, and so on. And this shape kind of brings to mind a loop of length 3, which is called a 3-loop. This is when math teachers would always say, "Oh, we call it a 3-loop because we're just so lazy," but that's flap and doodle. We call it a 3-loop because it's a good name. Alright, so if you're gonna call it a 3-loop, stand on business. Of course, with all the connections that exist in this diagram, there are many 3 loops that exist. We could go from A to B to C back to A using those points. But with all the points on offer, we could also go from B to C, and then back to B, and then back to C, and then back to that first point in B, thus creating what's called a for loop. Since the only line segments exist between different sets, as in there are no line segments within a set, we see how each step in this loop goes from one set to another, each time visiting a different vertex until we get to the final vertex, which returns to the beginning. In this way, we can make many different loops of many sizes, and this final question is for which values of n greater than or equal to 4 does the diagram contain at least one n loop. Of course, we already saw a for loop, and we could make a 5 loop in a similar way, from B to C, back to B, back to C, to A, and then back to the start in B. That's a 5 loop. Then for a 6 loop, there are enough vertices in B and C to just go back and forth between them, from B to C, to B, to C, to B, to C, and then back to B. In the same way, since B and C both have at least 4 vertices, we could construct an 8 loop. For a 7 loop, we would again get A involved, go from B to C, back to B, back to C, then back to B, then over to A, then come back to C, and then finish the loop by returning to the start. There's your 7 loop. A very similar construction could give us a 9 loop if at this part, when we go to B, we go to C and then B one more time, and then go to A, and then back to C before finishing off the loop. Thus, we added 2 new vertices to get that 9 loop. Creating a 10 loop is pretty straightforward. Just go back and forth, B to C, B to C, and then once we run out of vertices of B to go to, hop on over to A, and then travel back to C for the 10th vertex in the loop, so we're good and we can head back to the start to complete the 10 loop. To get an 11 loop, we could imagine just adding one more vertex to this 10 loop. For example, on the first trip to C, instead of going straight back to the next vertex of B, take a quick detour to A to add one new vertex, and then go back to B, and then proceed as before in the 10 loop. That way we get that plus 1 new vertex. And similarly for the 12 loop, just add one more detour. Perhaps on the second trip you take to C, again, instead of returning to B, head on over to that other vertex of A, and then head to the third point of B. Sorry I drew this orange part earlier, that was a mistake. Adding in that one detour gives us a 12 loop which visits all of the vertices, hence it's not possible to create a bigger loop. And so the answer to the question, for which values of n at least 4 does the diagram contain at least one n loop, the answer is all positive integers from 4 to 12 inclusive. Well, ladies, gentlemen, and mysterious riddly bitches, that's all the time we have today. Thanks, Evan, for this funny joke. And let us know in the comments if you've got any tips for measuring your dog at home without using contour integrals.
Riverside Drive, held me up when the first man I loved died, when I could only say I love you through sobs and say I'll miss you. Last time I wasn't talking shells out of the shotgun.